Lucas Hale had never been a man to take chances. In his world, trust was a liability, and liabilities got you burned. 46 years of life, 3 decades in business, and 2 ruthless betrayals had taught him that lesson so well it had settled in his bones. It was early morning at the Hale estate, the kind of morning when the air outside still clung to the coolness of dawn, and the sprawling glass and stone mansion glimmered under the first brush of sunlight. Inside, silence reigned except for the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, and the low hum of security cameras, always watching. Lucas stood in his private study, a room that smelled faintly of leather and cedar wood. To his left, embedded in the wall behind a large oil painting of his father, was the crown jewel of his home security, his vault. Not just a safe, but a climate-controlled fortress, fitted with biometric scanners and steel reinforcements. Inside, stacks of $100 bills sat neatly bound, gold bars lined the shelves like shining bricks, and in a glass case lay artifacts from his travels. An antique watch from Geneva, a signed first-edition novel, and a diamond necklace worth more than most people's homes. He pressed his palm to the scanner, and the heavy door swung open with a hiss. Lucas stepped inside, surveying the contents, mentally cataloging each item like he always did. Everything was in place. Everything was under his control. Or so he thought. A casual comment from a longtime friend had planted a seed of doubt that refused to die. "You don't even know her, Lucas," the friend had said 2 nights ago over drinks. "Maids aren't saints. You leave her alone in this place and she's bound to find a way to take something. Why tempt fate?" Lucas had brushed it off at the time, but the words had stayed with him. His newest hire, Tessy Brown, had been working at the estate for barely 2 months. She was in her early 30s, always punctual, polite, and efficient. She spoke little, kept her head down, and somehow managed to make herself almost invisible while keeping the house spotless. Still, he didn't know her. Not really. Trust wasn't given in Lucas Hale's world. It was tested, weighed, and earned through calculated risk. And so, the idea began to form. Reckless, perhaps, but effective. He would test her. By 9 o'clock, the plan was in motion. Lucas made a show of telling the household staff that he had to leave for a last-minute business trip to New York. His driver pulled the Bentley to the front. The staff waved him off, and the moment the gates closed behind the car, Lucas slipped through a side entrance and made his way back inside, unseen. He returned to his study, unlocked the vault, and deliberately left the steel door wide open. Inside, on the mahogany table just within reach, he placed 3 bundles of crisp $100 bills and the diamond necklace. They gleamed under the recessed lighting, impossible to miss. For good measure, he set a sleek leather briefcase, half full of cash, on the floor by the open doorway. Then he retreated upstairs to a private office where he had direct access to the mansion's security feeds. Every hallway, every room, every possible angle leading to the study was covered. He sat back in his leather chair, eyes on the screens, and waited. It was just after 10 when Tessy's old silver Toyota Corolla pulled into the staff parking area. She stepped out, hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing her usual modest navy blue uniform. She carried a tote bag that looked like it had seen better days and a lunchbox balanced on top. From the cameras, Lucas watched her greet the gardener with a warm smile before stepping inside. She moved efficiently from room to room, dusting, straightening, checking the windows. There was nothing suspicious in her movements, until she reached the East Wing hallway, the one leading directly to his study. Lucas leaned forward, his heart picking up pace. Tessy slowed her pace as she reached the end of the corridor. The vault door, wide open, was impossible to ignore. She froze, looking at it for a long moment. He could almost hear his friend's voice in his head. "Told you. No one walks past an open vault without at least peeking inside." On the monitor, Tessy stepped closer. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the steel door. She looked inside. Lucas held his breath. From her angle, she had a perfect view of the stacks of cash and the diamond necklace glittering under the light. She didn't move for several seconds, just staring. Then she did something that made Lucas tense. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. His stomach tightened. Was she taking pictures? Calling someone to tell them what she'd found? He adjusted the camera feed to zoom in on her face. She wasn't smiling. She didn't look greedy. She looked concerned. She pressed the phone to her ear and began speaking. Lucas, of course, couldn't hear her through the silent feed, but her body language was calm, not urgent. She paced slowly near the study door as she talked, occasionally glancing back toward the open vault. A minute later, she ended the call. What she did next caught him completely off guard. Tessy walked into the study, gently pushed the heavy vault door until it was almost closed, not latched, but no longer gaping wide. She turned, found a notepad on his desk, and scribbled something down. The camera caught a glimpse of her handwriting. Vault left open. Please secure. She placed the note neatly in the center of his desk, where he couldn't miss it. Then, without touching a single item inside, she turned and walked away, heading toward the kitchen to resume her work. Lucas sat back, frowning, conflicted. This wasn't what he'd expected. She hadn't taken anything, hadn't even lingered. She'd seen an open vault worth millions and treated it like someone might treat a forgotten umbrella. An oversight to be corrected, nothing more. Still, he told himself, maybe she was clever. Maybe she knew there were cameras and didn't want to get caught. He decided to keep watching. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully. Tessy cleaned the guest suite, polished the silver, and stepped out to water the plants on the patio. Then, just before noon, something happened that Lucas hadn't planned for. One of his business associates, Richard Vaughn, a man Lucas tolerated more than liked, showed up unannounced. Lucas's assistant, thinking the billionaire was out of town, let him in and told him to wait in the study. Lucas's blood ran cold. Richard was a man who couldn't resist an opportunity if it was staring him in the face, and right now an open vault full of cash was doing exactly that. On the security feed, Lucas watched as Richard stepped into the study, glanced around and smirked at the sight of the vault. He walked inside without hesitation, disappearing from view. A moment later, Tessy appeared in the doorway. She froze again, but this time, instead of leaving, she stepped forward. The camera caught her pointing toward the briefcase on the floor, her posture tense. Lucas leaned forward, gripping the arm of his chair. Whatever happened next, he knew, would reveal far more about Tessy Brown than any test he could have planned. Tessy, Richard Vaughn said with a slick smile as he stepped halfway out of the vault, a roll of cash in one hand. I didn't hear you come in. Tessy stood in the doorway, her eyes flicking from the briefcase on the floor to the glint of bills in his palm. Her grip on the cleaning cloth in her hand tightened, but her voice was steady. Mr. Vaughn, the vault isn't yours to be in. Richard's smile didn't fade. In fact, it widened into something more smug. Relax. Lucas won't mind. He and I go way back. I'm just checking on a few things for him. Tessy's brow furrowed. She stepped further into the room, positioning herself between Richard and the desk. That's not what it looks like. And I think you should leave before Mr. Hale returns. Upstairs, Lucas was frozen in place, eyes locked on the monitor. The tension in the room was so thick he could almost feel it from here. His test had taken an unexpected turn. He'd been prepared to see whether Tessy would take something. He hadn't planned for someone else to step into the trap. On the feed, Richard chuckled, dropping the roll of cash into the briefcase with casual arrogance. You think he's going to take your word over mine? You're the help, Tessy. If I tell him you were in here with the money, who do you think he'll believe? Lucas's jaw tightened. Tessy straightened her back, chin lifting slightly. I don't care what you tell him. I care about doing my job honestly. And right now that means making sure you put that money back where it belongs. Richard shook his head in amusement. You've got guts. I'll give you that. He glanced over his shoulder at the open vault, his eyes lingering on the diamond necklace. Shame to waste an opportunity like this, though. You could walk out of here with enough to never scrub another floor in your life. her lips pressed into a thin line. Money that isn't mine would never feel like mine. My mother taught me that before I could even write my name. That made him laugh outright. How noble. And how stupid. You think nobility pays the rent? Pays the doctor? Pays for whatever old junker you drive to get here? Lucas, still watching, noted the flicker of pain that crossed Tessy's face at Richard's words, the way her eyes briefly dropped, the way she adjusted her shoulders as if bearing a sudden weight. She was struggling, that much was clear, and yet, she didn't take the bait. Instead, she took a step toward him. "Mr. Vaughn, please leave the study." Richard's smirk faltered, replaced by a faint edge of irritation. Or what? She didn't raise her voice, didn't threaten in anger. She simply pulled her phone from her pocket and, without breaking eye contact, began to dial. Or I call the police and let them decide what to do about a man caught in another man's open vault. For the first time, Richard looked unsettled. "You wouldn't dare." The corner of her mouth lifted, but there was no humor in it. "Try me." Upstairs, Lucas had heard enough. His plan had gone far enough, and Tessy's integrity had already been proven 10 times over. He grabbed his phone, called his head of security, and told them to stall Richard in the study until he got there. Within moments, Lucas was striding down the hallway, his footsteps echoing sharply off the marble. Tessy's eyes widened when he appeared in the doorway. She stepped back automatically, glancing between the two men. Richard straightened, a falsely pleasant expression snapping into place. "Lucas, I was just—" "Stealing from me," Lucas cut in, his voice cool as ice. Richard's mouth opened, but before he could spin another lie, Lucas walked to the desk and pressed a button on the side. A panel slid open, revealing a small screen. He tapped it and footage from the hidden camera in the vault began to play. There it was, in crisp HD. Richard walking in, picking up the cash, examining the necklace, and stuffing the bills into the briefcase. "Care to explain this?" Lucas asked, his tone almost bored, which, Tessy thought, made it all the more dangerous. Richard stammered for a moment, then tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Lucas. I was just making sure everything was safe. Anyone could have walked in." "Someone did," Lucas replied, glancing toward Tessy. "And they didn't steal a thing." At that, Richard's eyes darted to her, a flicker of annoyance passing over his face. "You set me up." "No," Lucas said firmly, stepping closer to him. "You set yourself up." He motioned toward the door. "Get out. And don't ever come back." Richard hesitated, clearly wanting to protest, but something in Lucas's eyes made him think better of it. Without another word, he brushed past Tessy and stalked out of the study. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the quiet hum of the vault's ventilation system. Tessy stood still, unsure whether to speak. Lucas turned to her, his expression unreadable. "That vault was left open on purpose," he said finally, "to see what you'd do." Her stomach sank. You were testing me?" "Yes," he admitted without hesitation. "I don't trust people easily." A shadow crossed her face, something between disappointment and hurt. "You hired me but never trusted me. You didn't even give me the chance to earn it before setting a trap." "It wasn't meant to be a trap," he began, but she shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you call it," she said softly. "It still says more about you than it does about me." She turned to leave. Lucas watched her go, a strange tightness in his chest. He'd proven she was honest, but in doing so, he'd also proven something far less flattering about himself. Tessy finished her shift in silence that day, doing her work with the same care as always, but without her usual faint smile or small talk. By the time she left, Lucas was already wondering if she would come back at all the next morning. When the gates closed behind her car, the mansion felt bigger and colder than it had in years. Upstairs in his private office, Lucas replayed the footage one more time. Not of Richard, but of Tessy standing in the doorway, staring at the open vault, then choosing to close it and leave a note instead of taking anything. It wasn't just honesty. It was principle. And Lucas realized uncomfortably that he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen someone pass up easy money without even hesitating. What he didn't know yet was that Tessy's life outside the mansion was nothing like the orderly calm she carried within it, and that her reasons for turning down temptation went far deeper than he could have guessed. 2 days passed. Lucas Hale was used to running companies, not sitting in his own house feeling like something had gone wrong and not knowing how to fix it. But that was exactly where he found himself, pacing the length of his study, replaying every moment of the test he'd staged. Tessy had shown nothing but integrity. Yet she'd left work with that quiet, hurt expression, and each hour she didn't return felt heavier than the last. On the third morning, she didn't show up at all. Lucas wasn't a man who liked not knowing things. By noon, he had his assistant pull Tessy's employment records, not for her work history, but to find her address. The house was small, in a modest neighborhood on the edge of the city. The kind of place where kids' bikes sat out front and the paint on the picket fences peeled from years of sun. He almost went straight there, but something stopped him. Barging into her personal space didn't feel right. Instead, he thought of the one clue he'd overheard from the security footage. That phone call she'd made, asking her brother to bring groceries to the shelter. A few minutes of online searching led him to the Westbrook Community Shelter, a low-budget but bustling space serving hot meals to families in need. By mid-afternoon, Lucas was standing on the cracked sidewalk outside its brick facade. Inside, the air smelled faintly of soup and bread. Voices filled the space, laughter, chatter, the occasional crying child. And there, near the serving counter, was Tessy. She wore an apron over her clothes, ladling stew into bowls and sliding them down the line. Every so often she bent to speak to a child, her face lighting up in a warm smile that Lucas hadn't seen since before the vault incident. For several minutes he just watched her. This was a different Tessy, one not defined by her uniform but by her presence. She wasn't just helping, she was part of this place, greeting people by name, asking after their families. When the line thinned, he stepped forward. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, and she set the ladle down. "Mr. Hale, what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," he said simply. They stepped outside, where the winter sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Lucas shoved his hands into his coat pockets, feeling uncharacteristically awkward. "I left that vault open to see if you'd take anything," he admitted. "I thought I was being clever. All I did was insult you." Her expression was calm, but her voice carried a quiet firmness. "You weren't just testing me. You were assuming the worst about me before I had the chance to prove anything." "I know." He looked down for a moment. "And I'm sorry. I've spent too long expecting people to disappoint me. Most of them do. But you didn't. And I handled that wrong." Tessy studied him for a long moment. "I'm not perfect, Mr. Hale. I've made mistakes in my life. But I don't steal. Not because I've never needed money. I have. But because once you take something that isn't yours, you can't give back the part of yourself you lose in the process." Her words sat heavy in the air between them. Lucas cleared his throat. "I'd like you to come back to work. But more than that, I'd like to make things right." Tessy folded her arms, her posture guarded. "And how do you plan to do that?" He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. She hesitated, then took it. Inside was a thick stack of papers and a check on top. "This," he said, nodding to the papers, "is the deed to a small cleaning company I've just purchased. All licenses, equipment, and starting funds included. It's yours, if you want it." Tessy's eyes widened. "Why would you?" "Because you deserve more than a paycheck from me. You've been working hard to help other people even while you've been struggling yourself. I've seen people take fortunes and do nothing good with them. You, Tessy Brown, would do something better." Her voice was quiet when she asked, "Is this your way of buying forgiveness?" He shook his head. "No. This is my way of showing I trust you. Not because of what you didn't take from me, but because of what you give to everyone else." For a long moment, Tessy said nothing. Then she glanced down at the papers again. You know I can't run a company alone. Then I'll be your first client, he said with a small smile. And I'll make sure the contracts keep coming. You focus on building it. I'll make sure the doors stay open. Slowly, she smiled too. Not the guarded, polite smile he'd seen before, but something warmer. I'll come back, she said finally. But on one condition. Name it. Never test people's honesty by tempting them. If you want to know someone's true character, give them trust first. See if they live up to it. Lucas nodded. Deal. They shook hands, but Lucas suspected they were sealing more than just a condition for her return. It felt in some way like a promise between equals. Weeks later, the Hale estate was buzzing again, but this time it was different. Tessy no longer wore a maid's uniform. She arrived in a smart blazer with her company's name embroidered on the sleeve. Her cleaning staff, 3 new employees from the shelter, worked the rooms with professionalism that made Lucas oddly proud. On the days she wasn't at the estate, she was growing her client list, meeting with suppliers, and, as always, spending time at the shelter. One Friday afternoon, Lucas stopped by her office, a modest but tidy space she'd set up in the back of a small commercial building. On her desk was a framed photo of a smiling woman Lucas guessed was her mother, and a sticky note that read, "Remember why you started." She looked up from her paperwork when he entered. "Checking on me?" "Checking in," he corrected. "And maybe learning." "Learning?" she echoed. He shrugged. "I thought I understood value. I measured it in stocks, properties, bottom lines. But you measure it in trust, integrity, and community. That's worth more than anything in my vault?" Tessy laughed softly. "Careful, Mr. Hale. Keep talking like that and people will think you've gone soft." "Maybe I have," he said with a small smile. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment before Lucas added, "You know, I think your test taught me more than it ever taught you." She tilted her head. "Oh? And what's that?" "That sometimes the richest thing you can do," he said, "is believe in someone before they've proven themselves to you. Because the right person will rise to meet it." That night, back at the mansion, Lucas walked past the vault. It was locked, as it always was. But for the first time in years, he realized it no longer represented security to him. Security wasn't in steel walls or cash reserves. It was in knowing there were still people like Tessy Brown in the world. People whose worth wasn't defined by what they could take, but by what they refused to. And as he turned off the study light, Lucas smiled to himself, knowing his test had failed in all the best ways possible. The billionaire had tested her integrity, but it was her character that ended up testing and changing his heart. Spring sunlight spilled across the freshly polished floors of the Hale estate, where the air smelled faintly of lilies from the arrangements Tessy's staff had placed in the front hall. It had been a year since Lucas Hale left his vault unlocked. A year since a test meant to expose dishonesty had instead revealed integrity strong enough to shift the way he saw the world. Now, Tessy Brown's company, True Clean Services, was thriving. She employed 12 people, half of whom she'd met through the community shelter. Her clients ranged from small businesses to high-profile estates, and her reputation for reliability and honesty had spread far beyond the city. Every Tuesday, no matter how busy she was, Tessy still spent her afternoons at the shelter. And every so often Lucas joined her, though he insisted on working quietly in the background, handing out food or stocking shelves without drawing attention. The vault in Lucas's study was still there, locked as always, but it no longer carried the same weight in his mind. He'd realized that real wealth wasn't what he kept behind a steel door. It was in the people he could trust with it open. On a quiet Sunday morning, Lucas stopped by Tessy's office with coffee in hand. She was bent over her desk, reviewing schedules, her blazer draped over the chair. "You know," he said, setting the coffee down, "I don't think I've told you this enough, but I'm proud of you." Tessy looked up, smiling. "You have. but I don't mind hearing it again. They shared a moment of easy laughter, the kind born not from business arrangements or obligation, but from a friendship forged in honesty, tested in an unusual way and made stronger because of it. And somewhere in the quiet understanding between them, they both knew that while the vault door might stay closed, the door to trust, once opened, would never shut again. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together. With love,